Dober večer, lepo pozdravljeni, malo se bom obrnila. Se upravičujemo za zamudo, en od gostov je ravno kar prispel. Čez 2 minuti bo z nami za mizo. Dovolite mi, da dam par besed, zakaj smo se zbrali tukaj oziroma kaj počnemo in kaj bomo počeli v prihodnosti. Gre za Ljubljana Art Weekend oziroma za prvi dogodek. Pobudnik za nastanek mednarodne platforme Ljubljana Art Weekend, ki se pripravlja v sodelovanju s Cukrarno, kjer se nahajamo, in oddelkom za kulturo Mestne občine Ljubljana, je Ravnikar Gallery Space. Iniciativa se, podobno kot njene številne evropske paralele, zavzema za ustrezno prezentacijo in promocijo sodobne vizualne umetnosti. V okviru raznolikih dogodkov, predvidenega programa, bomo tako enkrat na leto moči združili različni partnerji. Galerije, projektni prostori, zasebni zbiratelji, muzeji in drugi javni prostori ter projekti, pa tudi mlade, še neuveljavljene iniciative posvečene sodobni umetnosti. Ljubljana Art Weekend 2022 bo potekal med 27. in 29. majem naslednje leto. Prvi sklop, ki se je zgodil danes med 3. in 5. uro popoldan, je bil namenjen svetovanju zbirateljem, ki se šele podajajo na pot zbirateljstva. V drugem sklopu dogodka pa je na vrsti pogovor z naslovom Z različnih zornih kotov, na katerem bodo svoja mnenja sopostavili različni akterji iz sveta sodobne umetnosti. Vasa Perović, Ovidiu Șandor, ki se nam bo ravno kar pridružil, in Renger van der Heuvela. Pogovor bo vodil kolega Tevž Logar, neodvisni kustos, pisec in urednik ter svetovalec za odkupe umetniških del. Pogovor bo seveda potekal v angleščini, so I switch to English. Thank you, dear guests. Welcome in Ljubljana, welcome in Cukrarna, and enjoy the evening.
Okay, hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. And first of all, thanks to all the guests that accepted the invitation to the talk. It's not easy in these times to migrate, so that's why I'm so much more grateful to welcome our guests here. So I will just describe shortly a basic idea of the talk. Hello, Ovidiu. The main idea is that, as maybe some of you know, in the beginning of the year, I did a show with 5 private collections in City Museum in Ljubljana. And actually, it reflects kind of my interests in relation to collecting. And for this talk, I kind of envisioned it in the sense that we are not just focusing to collections, but we focus to various aspects of collecting. Unfortunately, Christina Koenig from Vienna didn't make it to Ljubljana because of the, as you might know, Austria went to lockdown and this complicated her life. So I will try to address my guests also through this perspective. So one aspect is, of course, collections and collecting. So that's why our guests are Ovidiu Șandor from Timișoara and Vasa Perović from Ljubljana. And one really important part of collecting is, I already mentioned, the gallery system. And Renger van den Heuvel is the director of Spark Fair in Vienna. And through this, let's say, dynamics of the talk, we will try to enlighten some of the mechanisms that are kind of maybe a little bit more hidden behind the building of collections. I will just introduce my guests. Ovidiu Șandor, he's an entrepreneur and also founder of Art Encounters Foundation and Art Encounters Biennial in Timișoara, Romania. Reaching the fourth edition of this year, Art Encounters Biennial became the most important biennial of contemporary art in Romania, and of course also a very important reference event for the city of Timișoara. Ovidiu Șandor was also Romanian commissioner of Europalia, a cultural event that took place in 2019 in various cities in Belgium. My next guest, Vasa Perović, which you probably know the most. He works as an architect and is one of the founders of Perović Arhitecti in Ljubljana. They work alongside with the international team of young architects on a diverse range of projects in different European countries. And aside that, Vasa Perović is also a collector. These are some information that I got from an interview in Delo. A rough estimate is that he owns at least 500 works, but less than 1,000. He goes to a lot of exhibitions and fairs, and he follows what's going on around the world. But of course, we professionally often exchange, and why I actually invited him is this thought that he expressed in the interview. All these works show my flow of thoughts, thinking about the world and the ideas that obsess me. And my third guest, which I welcome, is Renger van der Heuvel. He studied law and then worked for many years as a filmmaker and publishing industry in Netherlands and Moscow. From 2012 to 2019, he was a managing director manager and a commercial director of Vienna Contemporary in Vienna. In 2021, he established Spark Art Fair Vienna, fair with an innovative new format offering an exciting way for collectors, museums and institutions to discover works from both emerging and established artists in an international scope. So, welcome. Thanks for coming. So, as a starting point, I would maybe firstly address Ovidiu and Vasa. So, how come you ended up collecting?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Great to be in Ljubljana and in such an amazing space. How people start collecting, I don't know, I think a lot of people start collecting when they start arranging a house or an apartment and the architect says, you know, on this wall maybe a piece of art would look nice. That's not really how it started for me, or only to some part. I did start collecting as a very young person, something totally different, antique maps. And then some time ago, about 10, 11 years ago, I switched to collecting art, and contemporary art has been the focus area for me. So I think I do have this disease of collecting. I'm sure that psychologists have a proper official name for this need to this disease, yes. So I think I had the virus for a long time, but it was only when I met a couple of gallerists that opened my eyes to what contemporary art means. I always say contemporary art has this threshold that people need to step over, and normally they need a bit of help from either collectors or gallerists or artists to do this step over the threshold. And I discovered something that seemed a very interesting universe, and I decided that's a new universe that I want to explore. And basically I view collecting as this kind of permanent exploration, both of what contemporary art means, but also in a very similar sense to my colleague collector here. I see contemporary art as a different way of looking at the world through this very special lens that artists have. And I think that's the great gift that artists give us, the fact that we can look at the world and all the various social, cultural, economic, historical aspects through this brain and eyes and lens that they provide, and to that respect, collecting for me is this sort of exploration that started when a couple of people started opening my eye towards contemporary art.
Vasa?
Okay, I have a reverse story, because in fact I started with contemporary art by being involved in a art scene in Belgrade when I was a late teenage, let's say, or early 20s. So I started, and I'm reversing now backwards, because recently I've been looking at more historical things and that relate to things that I have been looking at as contemporary in the last 20 years. So, but yeah, so I didn't start arranging my living room. I still don't have any artworks on my living room wall. But yes, it went the other way around. So I started by looking at contemporary, and now recently I've been more looking at the historical work that I think relates to what I looked at as contemporary as well. So,
okay, thank you. Renger, it's very precious that we have you here, especially with the fact that Christina was not able to come, because nevertheless, I mean, I will also address later other two guests, but nevertheless, fairs are important part where collectors and artists, curators meet, and of course, there are also transactions involved at fairs. So, but you somehow, as a managing director of the fair, you are a person that's kind of stands between these two clients in a way. So, on one hand, you have galleries, and on the other hand, you have collectors who have also their own demands. How you see this relation in the sense of, yeah, let's say communicating with people from both sides?
Yeah, I would say without both of them, fairs would not exist. I think there are a lot of changes at the moment going on. So I'm now running art fairs for like 10 years. And so I've been there when you saw that the number of art fairs was really like rising. But what we've also seen, I think before the pandemic, is that people and also collectors were, you know, there was a certain fatigue. And I come from a different industry, and when I started traveling to art fairs, I all of a sudden realized that you very often see the same people. And then going back to Vienna, I think is in many ways like a very interesting place. But when you look at the number of collectors of contemporary art, it's relatively small. And also for that reason, galleries from Vienna always had to move abroad to find collectors. During the pandemic, a few things happened, but so basically I stopped with Vienna Contemporary. I was already having a break, and then all these things happened, which was like super interesting to see, because I was really looking at a distance. And I think what happened during the pandemic, one of the things is that galleries started to discover the local market. They understood that if I'm not traveling the whole year abroad to international art fairs, but if I spend time with the people at home, I can also develop a market. And what I try to do with my new fair concept is to really develop the home market, because Vienna is too small to be part of this global circus and trying to attract all the people that you will find at Arco, at Armory, or at Art Basel. So I think a lot is in development. My aim is really to develop like the home market, but this is really like a long shot. And that's why I have this concept with a low threshold. Only one artist, also for people that are not that familiar with art, can engage them in a dialogue immediately and don't have to navigate through a booth with 5, 6 different artists. Is that a bit of an answer? It was a lot, but...
Thank you.
Okay.
Ovidiu, of course, I mean, every collector has its own affinities, but on the other hand, I think that building a collection is also involves a particular strategy. So, in relation maybe to fairs and also the galleries, which I really want to stress because it's part of the ecosystem in terms of mainly primary market, but of course also secondary market. How important for you is that you go to fairs, that you meet, I don't know, art advisors, you meet dealers? What is the let's say, how important is this role within your collection?
So, yes, I think it's somehow a complicated question. I read a presentation done by an American collector in the 60s, and he had this first advice that what you do when you want to start collecting is actually you don't go out and buy art, but you go out and buy books about art, right? And I think that's the first side of a strategy related to collecting, and that is related to gathering information and trying to understand what's going on, learn about the artists, learn about their artwork, and so forth. And of course, for that, art fairs are an important place. Biennials are another important place, as are visits in the galleries. I think that's a key strategy, and especially going to galleries not necessarily at the opening. Openings are rather social events and less moments when you really can sit with the gallerist or the artist to discuss about art. So I strongly encourage gallery visits outside the opening when you can do it with time and the galleries can focus on the discussion with you, as are all these books, and obviously nowadays the whole digital and online art universe. So I think that's one component, at least for me, of the collecting. And then there's the second component, which is less cerebral maybe, which is, for me, it's also important, even if it's a very important artist, even if it's a key piece, even if everybody around me tells me, you know, that's the piece to have. If it doesn't resonate with me, then it's not for my collection, right? So there's also this affectionate side, which I think it also needs tendering. You need to explore and understand what you like, why certain works talk to you or certain works don't talk to you. I think actually contemporary art is not the piece itself. It's rather what happens between the viewer and the piece of art. That's the contemporary art. And if that doesn't exist between me and a piece of art, then I'm not so curious. And again, this side also needs a lot of training. The way in which you search for or look out for information trains your brain muscle. I think in the same way you need to see a lot of art, because that will train your eye. I think looking through art books, going to exhibition, going to art fairs, going to biennials, you train basically your eye to spot the pieces that somehow you relate to. So these are the two components that I think are important, and both of them actually relate to something that is maybe less understood about collecting. I think from the exterior, a lot of people believe that collecting is about having a lot of money and spending it. Well, what people don't really understand is that beyond the money, little or more, it doesn't matter, what you need is a lot of time. And I think that's the key to good collecting. There are famous collectors that haven't necessarily spent a lot of money, but have spent a lot of time next to artists, next to art, exploring, trying to understand, and so forth. And I think that's the side that is not really understood from the beginning. The fact that you need to go to art fairs, not all of them, of course, but at least some. You need to go to biennials and other types of exhibitions. You need to go to museums. You need to go to galleries. You need to go to the artist studio. And unfortunately, I think for quite a number of collectors, sometimes time is the thing that you have least, right? And I think those collectors that put a lot of time into collecting, they actually show the passion and the dedication they have towards art and artists. So yes, maybe that explains a bit how I view things. In terms of information and understanding other artists, one of the strategies that I have is whenever I meet an artist, I always ask what other artist does that respective artist like and why, what other artists they don't like and why. And very often get that, because that's a bit, you know, everybody in the art world has a stake. Obviously, the galleries will try to very nicely pack the artist that gallerist is presenting. The museum considers that the artist that has the present-day exhibition is the greatest artist. So everybody, obviously curators and art advisors have their favorites and so forth. And I think it's very important to talk to all these sort of players, and then also based on your judgment to make your own or create your understanding, and then make your own calls regarding your collection. And then yes, there are, I think, collections that have a very well-defined concept or strategy from the beginning, like a clearly defined red thread of the collection that is sometimes written in a very clear paragraph. Or there are other collections where maybe it's a much broader approach, where maybe it's harder to see one single red line. And I think, for example, myself, I rather fall in the second category. There is a number of red threads that I see in my collection without those red threads being defined from the beginning. But rather I discover, oh, wait a moment, all these things together, they start telling a very interesting story and so forth.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I had the pleasure to work with you for the show in the City Museum earlier this year. But Vasa, we didn't directly collaborate, but we exchanged quite a lot. So actually, the question will be similar, but with you, I would also like to address a bit, let's say, the backstages, because, you know, always when we meet at art fairs, I really enjoy these stories that you tell me of these artists that went from this gallery to another gallery. There is this very nice artist, go check there. And I always sense that you are very, very thorough. And I also admit that I learned a lot from you. I mean, from the information that you gave me. And yeah, how is your approach?
There's going to be 10% next time.
Okay, I will charge more. So
no, but as you already said, basically the acquisition of information and knowledge is the basis of doing anything, not only collecting, but generally whatever activity we may pursue. So in general, certainly fairs have for a long time been, let's say, a very important, at least positions, not in the sense that they condense, let's say, the universe of art circulation, commercial side, let's say, in one spot in the world for a certain very short period of time. So it gives you a kind of a possibility, as somebody who is interested in the art collector or not, to kind of see condensed situation of the art market, at least, not if not art production in totality. So that was very important. But as you said, there's also this fatigue that happens with all of us, with people that are really devoted to these processes and that go to all the exhibitions and the biennials and whatever. At some point, you cannot go to yet another biennial, or you cannot go to yet another art fair because well, either there's no time or you're just too tired of. So basically, what I see as very interesting is what are going to be the next processes. And I think things changed a lot during the coronavirus. I was always suspecting and always having these gloomy predictions for fairs, like even the big fairs like Art Basel, what could be the future of this kind of fairs, because they just grew too vast, too big to comprehend. And what could be the potential future for this kind of activity, especially in the last 10 years. You know that this proliferation is actually only 15 years old. It's not the last 20 years ago, there was nothing. No, there was basically Art Basel and then Art Cologne, and that was about the art map of the world, or Armory. So this proliferation has basically caused this. So, and in that sense, I think that these initiatives, or the let's say the attempts to change that side of the art market universe, at least, are necessary, and they were necessary even before the pandemic. And pandemic actually helped probably push things forward before the time.
I couldn't have done this 3 years ago.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think that even though we are talking in Ljubljana, which is at the beginning of the process of kind of trying to reclaim some sort of interest in contemporary art or contemporary art collecting, in fact, probably the three of us are tired, or four of us are tired from it already for a long time. So, in that sense, yes. So, I think acquisition of information is a very important part of the process, and acquisition of knowledge alongside information. So, basically, yes, this is why you have to see as much as possible. So, and you have to hopefully make hopefully make as, well, you will inevitably make a lot of mistakes, and hopefully you will learn from them. So, not always. I didn't learn from all the mistakes I made.
If I can make a comment on art fairs, for people that go the first time to an art fair, especially to a very big one, Art Basel or Frieze or whatever, I think it's very important to understand that it's a very overwhelming experience. And it's very good to try to do that with some guidance, somebody that walks with you through the art fair and points out the galleries with interesting programs, the interesting artists that are on display, because of course it's so much art that if you don't have a bit of guidance, you just feel overwhelmed and you don't even know where to start with an art fair. It's easier, as I said, with galleries and museums and biennials that are maybe better mediated, right? But art fairs can be quite scary, at least the first time. I mean, the champagne and all that is very fun, but then when you enter and start seeing so much art, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, maybe this is a good starting point for my question to Renger. And actually in my mail that I sent to all of you, I also told you that I will try to address some like also basic information regarding the market. Because as Vasa mentioned, yeah, Ljubljana, Slovenia, or let's say the wider region, we are kind of still at the beginning of this process. And Renger, maybe from you, it would be very nice to hear maybe kind of a practical information in sense of what, for instance, galleries expect from the fair, what collectors expect from the fair. So when we had also pleasure to collaborate, and we were approaching galleries, we were approaching clients. So maybe just in terms of, let's say, the structure of the fair, this would be interesting maybe for the public, how you balance these two poles, let's say.
Okay, let's start with the galleries. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a marketplace, yeah, and basically I sell square meters and they have to sell art. But I'm very thankful there's a bit more than that when it comes to art. So I think for galleries, it's important. First, they want to see peers, yeah, so they want to see other galleries, and so they want to meet their colleagues. They're also very often interested, yeah, to meet new colleagues from countries or regions they're less familiar with. Of course, it's important that they sell, but that's obvious. But for them, contacts are also very important. Yeah? And Vienna is then not like a huge market compared to Rhineland or London or New York. But Vienna has, of course, a very interesting ecosystem with museums and institutions. So for galleries, it's also very important just to meet people from museums, museum directors and curators. For collectors, I think the two gentlemen know better than I, but I think collectors, I think they want to see something new. I don't think you go to an art fair to see the usual, and beyond that, they also want like a good experience. But I think it depends on the character of the collector. If he wants to mingle with other collectors, which I think very often happens, to talk with each other about collections and how they collect, or they do it more in a more private way. But then I'm talking a bit how I see the future. What I would like to and this is maybe something you also want to express, is that there's like the primary market and the secondary market. And the primary market will say that the artworks are for the first time being brought on the market, and this is where the galleries play like a crucial role as the people who discover artists and bring them to the market to nourish them. And the way I like to think about an art fair, because you can make an art fair with a lot of secondary market, with a lot of dealers, but I try to make an art fair where you see a lot of new works. So primarily I want to service the primary market because I think this is also more interesting. Their collectors or institutions can see artists they follow, but then they will see a new work instead of what they have seen already at other art fairs. And I think that's always like disappointed if you go somewhere you see it, you want to have this new you want to re-enter this dialogue with this artist, because that's what I would not consider myself a collector, but that's also how I look at artists. I'm always interested in the development because then you see the character, the signature, and this is very interesting, I think.
Okay, I'm happy that you mentioned this relation between primary and secondary market. So here I would again address both of you, because it's a relatively nice situation, because you are coming from Romania, which I think, let's say from the region, has a fairly well-established primary market. I mean, in the sense of that there are galleries who go to Art Basel, to FIAC, to Frieze. You know, they have like particular role. And Vasa, you're coming from Slovenia, Ljubljana, where it's...
I'm counting the galleries from there that go to Art Basel. I came to number 2 so far.
I know, but still, I mean, also, you know, I had the opportunity to be present in Romania and here, and I can see that...
yes, it's a developing primary market.
The developing primary market is way different. So how do you see effect on wider recognition of contemporary art, let's say, that galleries, I mean, let's say, the role of the gallery wider, not just sales, but what are, let's say, the other aspects that, let's say, the represented by galleries bring in the system?
So yes, I think you're very right. The fact that Romania has 3 straws of hair on our head, it doesn't mean that we're hairy, we're still bald, but not as bald maybe as other places. So yes, Romania still has a small number of galleries, so maybe there are 10, 12, 15 galleries that are of some various relevance. Well, of course, galleries are very important in any art scene. First of all, because that's the gateway through which artists have a chance to become visible in the gallery, in the exhibitions, to become visible at art fairs, to become visible in various other types of exhibitions, because of course, if a gallery has an interesting program, any international curator will follow what are the new artists that join that gallery and might discover new artists. So I think that's one. Second, of course, the galleries have a very, very important role in educating a public. And here I always think about 3 maybe layers. Of course, the most visible one is what we maybe call here collectors. So people that have this virus and have hundreds of works and need to pay storage to keep them and all that. But that's one layer. And I don't think a country necessarily needs to have a lot of collectors. I'm sure here we will hear better statistics. But as one gallerist says in Romania, if every year there is one new collector born in Romania, then we're very happy. So that's the small top of the pyramid maybe. Then I think what's very important in an art system is to have people that buy from time to time art. They don't necessarily need to become collectors in the sense of hundreds of pieces, but people that go to exhibitions, meet artists, and from time to time decide to spend a bit of money on putting on the wall something that is not just a beautiful poster from IKEA, but something that has a special meaning to them, that has a special history. You know, I've seen this initial exhibition of this artist, or I've visited his studio, and so forth. So I think this second type of art buyer is also very important, because here we talk about thousands of people that will do it. It won't be 10 or 20 or 30 people. And then, of course, the people that don't necessarily buy, but that become followers of consumers of contemporary art, in the sense of going to exhibitions, going to galleries. I do think that contemporary art is, if you look at more advanced societies, it has become in the last 20 years part of the urban lifestyle. You know, if you're a young, well-educated person in London, a normal way to spend a certain Friday evening would be to go to a gallery opening. And yes, then you go to the club or to the restaurant or whatever, and but it's part of this lifestyle, and that creates a broader ecosystem, right? And I think galleries in places like Romania do have also this role of bringing together at the opening or at various other events like-minded people, people with the same interest in contemporary art. If they buy or not is maybe less relevant, but I think that sort of public is key. And I say that also in the quality of organizer of a biennial. The biennial, when we go to, for example, sponsors or even public entities where we apply for funding, it's always the question, how many people will enjoy that event, right? So creating a broader public is very key. And then from that public, some people will start buying from time to time art, and then a smaller number of people will become collectors. And of course, I think collectors then have this important role of somehow irrigating the whole system. At the end of the day, the contemporary art system is not different than any other system in our society. It does need money to run. Galleries will pay the rent at the art fair only if collectors buy art, and so forth. So I think you need the whole construction. You can't have an art scene where you just have 3 very dedicated, maybe even extremely rich collectors. You need the whole pyramid to base it on. And again, to have 3 galleries at Art Basel, you need to have a country with at least 15 galleries, if not 30. And again, to have 30 galleries, you have to have hundreds of artists that practice art in that country, so that you have 100 artists that have the quality to be in galleries and in exhibitions and so forth. So I think it's important to understand that the whole system needs also this broad base, besides the people that you see in the press. I don't know which huge collector has bought another big piece or whatever, but I think developing this broad base is very important, and I'm just amazed how many people are here. I think this is a sort of very strong statement for this city, because yes, I think that's how you build up and develop a system.
Vasa, would you add something?
No, I think you more or less said it all. I mean, but basically, in the context of Ljubljana, you just describe the pyramid which needs to be constructed, and I think you have to start constructing from somewhere. So there's going to be a point in that pyramid from which we will need to construct a system. And what Piera was doing, for example, or Barbara, the gallerists in the last few years, has been, in fact, going towards this, to kind of try to create a kind of a let's say, points in the potential pyramid, which might one day, well, it doesn't take a long time, depending on, of course, it also depends a little bit on the very much on the marketing and a lot on enthusiasm. It doesn't take a long time, but it's years in planning and development. No, I mean, it doesn't take a long time. Doesn't mean that by next summer or by next whatever, Ljubav, how do you call this? it's going to all be all well and good. But it takes, it could only be 5 years before you develop, because in fact Romania is an example like that. Maybe we're talking about 15 years, no?
10.
Or yes, but for example, galleries like Plan B are international already for the, yeah. So basically, it took very relatively well in context of history.
Okay, here maybe I would also point out something that you all three can probably also relate to. I know that, for instance, Romania Cultural Institute supports participations on art fairs, which of course is related also to cultural politics, which is, I think, in the countries like Slovenia, Croatia, former Yugoslavia, Hungary, it's important. It's, I mean, already, you know, we all know that Poland has its own strategy, UK had their own strategy, so of course, smaller countries, I think, even more. So Renger, you also, I think, you communicate with either like cultural institutes to support the participations of fairs. So, what do you think that kind of cultural politics, let's say, should do in this sense? It's basically, I'm aware that it's a very complex question, and it's. But what are your thoughts on this? How local producers should be supported to? Because we know that, nevertheless, running a gallery basically functions on the way of import-export. If you want to export Slovenian artists, you need to import something else to bring clients. So, what is your opinion on, let's say, the cultural politics and the subsidies that should be imposed, like long-term?
Well, a lot of it can be imposed, but I know that almost nothing will be. So in that sense, I think it's good to start with something. I think, of course, a much broader support from if there. Well, first of all, there has to be a cultural policy from the government at the moment, or even a few governments back. I don't see one. No? Now, even less so. No? So basically, there's no cultural policy to hope for, and a part of that cultural policy is also going to be that support for the arts in whatever way. One of which is also going to be support for the promotion, if you want, of arts on fairs. I don't think that this kind of incremental drops in the ocean, because I know that some of these young galleries are supported from time to time with some kind of, I don't think these drops in the ocean are going to help color the ocean blue. No? So basically, it generally needs to be much broader, but I don't think it's going to happen. So in a sense, I wouldn't turn towards that as a I would
solution of the problem.
Yes, I would never expect a solution of a problem from that side, but I would basically more try to rely on obviously existing enthusiasm and energy that at the moment lies hidden somewhere in this kind of sphere. I don't think you should expect it. Well, you know it. No, we all know it. Basically, that government is generally inert to any sort of initiatives of this kind. Not only talking about art market, but general support for the arts. So they don't support major national institutions, or if they do everything they can to undermine them even. I mean, how do you expect support for this kind of small initiatives like the one that's happening here today? So I think basically we have to rely on the people that, for the moment, for the very many moments in future.
Renger, how was your experience related to, you had an opportunity to work with galleries from, let's say, former Eastern republics. I'm talking about your experience with Vienna Contemporary, and also the galleries from the West. How did you kind of sense some, like, differences in communicating with the galleries in terms of, you know, individual strategies of the galleries, or do you think it's kind of leveled, it's the same?
That's a really difficult question. I think what counts for most of the galleries is that they're all very passionate, and that's what I like about galleries, because they always are very speak highly and perform this role in communicating with potential clients or clients. I don't know, for me it goes too far to say. I can see there's some differences. So the only thing I can say now is that but that's more how I look at it from, over time, and also having lived myself, for example, in Moscow, that I realized that there are different cultures, but I rather think of my new fair as a European fair rather than an Eastern European, because I don't know, for me that's something of the past. And I had a couple of years like an interesting session where a lot of people from Eastern European countries are there, and then I realized all these are of course different cultures, so it doesn't make sense to put everything in one basket. And all the contacts with galleries, I would say they're always on a personal, individual level. And going back to your other point about cultural institutions, I always try to connect them or make it easier for galleries to participate, because every 2,000-3,000 they get from an institution helps. But on the longer term, I'm more interested, and this can be public or private money, to stimulate this production function of the fair. So I want to move away from selling square meters and see if in the production, in the value chain, I can play a more important role. And then, of course, it's helpful if there are also public funds available.
If I may interfere for a second, I don't think that this notion of this East and West is very accurate anymore. No? So I think that basically I wouldn't draw this kind of divisions any longer. I don't think they really count. Maybe 15 or 20 years I would have completely understood, but I think it's much more blurred now. No?
You think so?
Yes.
I mean, if you let's say if you check the let's say the track records on secondary market.
Okay, I'm not talking about market-wise, but I'm just talking about the cultural production or the.
Okay. Okay, no, I
see it all as just one universe.
No, I agree, and I think this was also the positive aspect of the galleries that when the East wasn't so institutionally hot anymore. They realized that basically the main idea is not to label their activities as Eastern European activities, but it's art, it's general, but still I think, I mean, also personally sometimes I'm confronted with still this block of with the wall, also in terms of not just economical value, but there is still this hesitance, and maybe in this context, Ovidiu, question for you. What I respect very much in context your activities. Okay, there is a actually very precise collection that you are building, but on the other hand, also Art Encounters Foundation, let's say the public program that you are running, is something that supports local community, not talking in the context of economy, but more, let's say, in terms of distribution, and also establishing connections with the international space. So how come, let's say, you decided for this?
Yes, the way I decided to do that is probably, again, what happens with a lot of collectors. You start collecting, then at a certain moment a gallery or an artist asks for a bit of help because they want to put together an exhibition or they want to publish a catalog, and you like a lot that artist, and then you help a bit. And then I got involved in organizing an exhibition when there was a group of curators and collectors from Tate Modern visiting Romania. So I sort of slowly entered also in this world of putting together exhibitions, and then that was the next step to to do the biennial, which of course needed a vehicle to organize it, so that was the foundation. And then of course you can't have a foundation that exists only every second year. You develop then also what we call a permanent program. But I think that relates to the previous question. I think you asked about this governmental level. I always look at it in three layers, which I think all three are somehow important. I think if we talk about the galleries in Romania that succeeded to reach Art Basel and so forth, all that was based on individuals and their own contacts. You know, artists meeting curators, local gallerists succeeding to meet people abroad, to join certain type of fairs, and then slowly going up the pyramid of fairs, if there's one. And so you have this personal level, which I think is very important. And I think whatever countries like Romania and probably here as well, what has been succeeded till now has been the activity of this layer. A number of galleries, a number of artists, a number of collectors that almost privately connected themselves to the international art scene. What I think is missing, at least in a country like Romania, is the in-between layer, which should be the institutional layer. Museums in the country connected to museums all over the world. Foundations in Romania connected to institutions abroad. Art schools connected to art schools abroad. That's the layer that, at least now in Romania, is far behind the layer of this sort of private or personal context that is already established to a certain degree. But at least in public institutions, we see in Romania, with very, very few exceptions, a big difficulty for those institutions to connect themselves to the international art scene, right? And that's what we try to do with the foundation, is to be one of these institutional links and to create both the biennial as a place of connection and bringing together people and art and so forth, but also doing a lot of collaboration with various other private or public institutions abroad. Right now we have a very interesting exhibition in our foundation space done together with the Centre Pompidou in Paris. We have various residence programs with other foundations abroad where we help a local artist to go in residence in that place, and then we bring an artist from that country or city in residence in Timișoara. We again have a residence program for international curators where we invite young international curators to spend time in Timișoara to discover the art scene, sometimes even do an exhibition with local artists. But mainly what we want is that those international curators in their career, when they put together exhibitions in museums, in biennials, in whatever, that they remember, oh, actually there was one artist in Timișoara that had this approach about a given subject or a certain type of artistic practice that is relevant in a different context. So I think developing this intermediate layer is very, very important, both in terms of public and private institutions. And that's where I personally see the big problem of Romania. We have done as much as you can do, or it's not much more we can do on this sort of private connectivity. We need to step up to this more institutional connectivity. And then, of course, on top of everything, it would be great if the government would have a clear strategy. Yes, the Romanian Cultural Institute does support the presence of galleries in art fairs, but we can't really talk about a given strategy. Though I strongly believe that for a country like Romania, culture should be a key diplomatic and marketing tool, because I think we do have a very vibrant cultural alive scene, both in visual arts, in cinematography, in performance, in design, and so forth. I think those are the values that Romania should try to project outside. I think, unfortunately, countries like Romania, and maybe your case as well, is that a lot of people in other places know either very little about the country, or they know only the bad things about the country, and maybe one football player. And that's why I strongly believe that culture will be, for this sort of countries, East European or non-East European, it doesn't really matter, but I think it should be a major focus of this sort of international marketing and diplomacy. Romania has done two very interesting experiences in this respect. 3 years ago, there was something called the French-Romanian Season. It's a program that France has as a country, a strategy, where I think every year they invite a different country, and then that respective year Romania was invited. So a lot of Romanian cultural events were brought to France, and a lot of French cultural events were brought to Romania, exactly to strengthen this connections both on the individual level but also institutional level. And for example, what we do with Centre Pompidou is the result of that season. I've been involved in Europalia, where again Romania was invited 2 or 3 years ago, and that was another good example where Romania could present in Belgium everything from exhibition of historical artifacts to 2,000 years old, to the youngest artist or youngest hip-hop musicians, right? So Romania could show this vibrant creativity that exists in Romania as it exists in any other place. So of course I think governments should be much more open to this, but in the same time, if I look in Romania, the cultural scene doesn't know how to sell this to the government, right? You need to explain to the government why it's important, how that can bring back something to the country and so forth. And I think, unfortunately, at least in Romania, culture has been very rigid to using cultural language when talking to politicians. No, you need to wrap that culture in political terms, right, to explain why that is beneficial. And it's not going to be about the philosophy behind the artwork of a given artist, but it will be a different language that needs to be explored. And I think here the art scene has this expectation. They should give us, they should support. I don't think they should. I think the art world or the cultural world should explain why this is key, right? And then government and even maybe private individuals and so forth will want to help if they better understand why this is important and to what this could lead.
Vasa, I know that time is ticking for your plane. So maybe, yeah, probably it's going to be the last question. So unfortunately for Q&A, Vasa won't be present. But I have a question that, yeah, relates a bit also to the question to Ovidiu. I mean, how you see your collection? Is it something that you are interested to? I mean, I know that you showed already some parts of your collection, and how is your attitude towards this showing the collection to the public? So, are you interested in that? Is it not important? Is it accidental? Is it something that you want to do,
well,
for instance?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as you know, I never called it really a collection. It was more like an accumulation that I consider this amount of works that have happened to end up in my sphere. So the collection in itself would have implied a much more organized and much more focused way of strategizing, which I tended not to do. And then on top of that, it took so many years that those strategies changed so many times that I can't really call it, I don't see any homogeneity in it. And that's, I think, what collection implies. Maybe the only homogeneity is me. So in that sense, yes. Well, as you know, yes, I liked to show it if the occasion was right. I never liked to show it as some sort of the idea of a private collection or the idea of this particular accumulation shown in that space. But on this one occasion, where I actually transported my own house to a museum, so in a sense that trying to show that the works I live with is not only the artworks, but it's basically my world. No? So in that sense, I think that was an interesting opportunity. This is why I took it. Otherwise, I consider it something relatively private. I don't, as you know, I have no public engagement or no, as you have this kind of public presence or whatever, of a foundation or whatever, but basically it's my own personal universe. And it never was intended for some sort of, there was never a superior motive, and there was never a great plan behind it, except for, yeah, let's say selfish reasons that it kind of ended up in one spot. So in that sense, no, I don't have any great plans. I do have a simple problem that after 30 years of doing this, I'm wondering, at some point you start wondering where it could lead to and what's the purpose and what's the point, and then you try to kind of think of another way maybe of engaging with the whole, and that's what I'm, as you know, also I'm considering already for a few years. So that there has to be another way in doing, in kind of remaining interested and remaining as active, but without maybe producing as much luggage or baggage along the way.
Just maybe just a reaction to what you said. I mean, collection is a living organism, as you said. Also, I know, Ovidiu, you are developing your collection. So probably, you know,
when he was talking about those red lines, multiple red lines, I was thinking how many thousands of red lines would I consider?
No. So you have a collection of red threads.
Textile, a carpet.
No, actually, what I wanted to say, to ask you, so probably through this process, some works probably drop out from your interest, and so do you resell, for instance, that you sell some works from collection, so you can acquire some works that you are like more interested in the sense of that you maybe, no, I mean, not reselling and dealing, but maybe just, you know, to have like...
As you know, I only ever sold to buy. So basically, some works from the 60s ended up paying for some works from the 2020s, no? And this kind of, or vice versa sometimes. But generally, it's no. Yes, the whole point of this whole process, let's say, was also making all these mistakes and hopefully learning from some of them. So in that sense, I don't see it as a problem. Yes, you are sometimes in love with someone, and then you are no longer in love with someone. So that happens with all the things. You, for a certain period of time in your life, you love your sofa, and then you really think, how could I do this? How could I buy this stupid thing? So the same applies to everything else, but well, doesn't automatically mean that I'm going to chuck it out of the window or drop it on the secondary market. But it's still part of some sort of history. I mean, with all the bad and good decisions that we made, business-wise, whatever, personal-wise or whatever. No?
Renger, and what about you? Do you have like this disease that Ovidiu and Vasa have, or you kind of made the line and you said, okay, I'm not going in this direction? How is your affinity towards contemporary art? I mean, of course, you are working within it, and so probably you're not hating it, but still, do you buy from time to time some things, or?
Yeah, I would say I'm less than 500 still, so I have a way to go. No, now I have a bit different role, so now I see a lot more, I would say, and I mean, in a certain way, I mean, as an organizer, you also are collecting, yeah, because we work by invitation, so you also try to get like a nice mix of established and younger artists, and I'm in a luxury position because, I mean, when the fair happens, at least one night I try to stay a bit longer when everybody is gone. And then I can walk around, and then I have my collection maybe for one night, but that's it. So I truly enjoy it.
A nice one, yeah. Ovidiu, and people already had an opportunity to get to know a bit your collection because of the exhibition that we did together. But still, probably there are some people in the public that didn't see the exhibition. So maybe if you could just frame it a bit, or to kind of detect your interests, and then I was thinking maybe to open the floor for questions. I hope there will be some. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I've been collecting till now has been focusing on Romanian art, which I define as being art done by Romanian-born artists, regardless if they live in the country or outside the country, or non-Romanian-born artists that are producing art that somehow relates to Romania or to other Romanian artists. So that's how I sort of limit it. And there are two important areas that I collect. The bigger one in terms of how many pieces I succeeded to collect till now is contemporary art, so art after the Second World War. So both the more historical position, the 60s, the 70s, but also the generation after 89 and the young generation nowadays. And then the second area, which is a smaller number of pieces, but the same interest from my side, which is the Romanian historical avant-garde, so the art of the 20s, 30s, 40s, which actually creates sort of almost 100 years of contemporary art history. So maybe starting somewhere after the First World War. So that's the area. I can't really define a red thread. As I said, there's a number of red threads, but I can't really frame in one phrase the content of it, but I can define these sort of borders. What I'm doing now is starting to look more internationally, and see how my collection can become international. Of course, the art of a country like Romania, at the end of the day, is a quite limited art, and collecting more would maybe mean to go lower in terms of quality, and that's not necessarily what I would like to do, but rather what I think the strategy will be a bit going forward is to find those East European and international artists that frame the work of Romanian artists, or the works that are in my collection, either by highlighting relevant connections or similarities, or the opposite of it, showing contrasts. Because as we were discussing here, people perceive Eastern Europe, it's the same history, the same culture, the same whatever, while of course in reality it's certain similarities and certain differences. So probably I'll be exploring more this sort of international frame that I might give to the collection of Romanian art that I succeeded to gather. Again, very much in line with him. It was maybe initially more of an accumulation. Now I'm trying a bit more conscious to understand what I've been doing and where I could move it, but it's a living organism, obviously, and somebody said very nicely, what you collect is yourself. And of course, me as a person goes through a constant transformation, positively, hopefully. And I think the collection will evolve as well along with the evolution of my interest or my understanding of things and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And Renger, for you, the last question, maybe just a little bit about thoughts on Spark and future, how maybe you can reflect the first edition a bit that happened in June, and next year in March is the second edition, and just to give a little bit of push to the public to visit Vienna in March.
Okay. Well, you were part of it. I think we made a good start. The concept has been very positively being reviewed by the audience, but galleries, collectors, institutions, and also the press. And there's a lot of interest. And I can stick to this format of solo presentations. And I think it's a very nice way to engage with an artist, to understand his or her position. And I will continue along this path, and I will also, and this is March is like short time, but on the longer term, I really want to play like a more important role in the production of new works that then are the first time shown at Spark, and then basically also what you said, like irrigating the system, but then in a different way, whether it's public or private money, but stimulate art production, and that Spark is then one of the moments in the year in Vienna that you definitely have to go there. So, end of pitch here.
Okay. I would open the floor for questions. So, if there are any questions for our guests,
Thank you. So I would first say that I'm very thankful that I can see Mr. Renger in real, because we have been talking in Mars via Zoom platform. So I'm Nora the Sandpik man, and so I would like to maybe to ask you. We have been talking about this blockchain art at the moment. So if you can maybe express more about a little bit about that,
about what?
Blockchain art platform.
Blockchain. Okay,
that you were just launching at the time. And just to finish one thing, because I see really that with blockchain, with NFT, all these things that artworks can become really financial investment assets effectively, and this can be linked also with your thoughts, video with. Link with government, with industry, all this. Then, in this kind, I think that can be more understanding between both sides, this cultural and governmental and industrial side. So.
Okay. I'm also involved in a blockchain project and art, and actually that's something we didn't talk about, but it's about the production and the consumption, I would say, of digital art. And this is also like a field that completely, I would say, is open. I'm working in that field also for like 1.5, 2 years. And what we've seen on one side, there's the crypto art community, which people from the art world say it doesn't have to do much with art. And then there's the traditional art world. And what happened actually the last couple of months is that these two worlds for the first time met each other, and then we've seen like these very high sales volumes, and so it's really a hype. But there's always something behind the hype, and I think artists will use digital means to express themselves, so there will be more digital production. And this will also be sold and consumed in a different way than we see in the traditional physical world. But I don't know, I can say a lot about that, but I think it's also a very interesting development. As a fair organizer, I'm also interested in it because the blockchain technology can also help artists and galleries to make money on secondary sales. And I mean, there are certain systems and processes in place also in the traditional art world, but I think for the future for digital artists, this is also like a great advantage of blockchain, that they can also make money automatically on secondary sales of their artworks.
Thank you. Any questions?
I would just ask regarding this question of NFTs, and do you think, or because you can, I think that we can experience also the misuse of these NFTs in the art world these days, so that some are just translating the, analog or art to the digital, which is not the NFTs. And how do you think that this we can,
I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. You mean NFTs at art fairs or NFTs for
no, in general.
Oh.
In general, and also at art fairs. Some art fairs are giving the opportunity to the artists or to the galleries to sell NFTs, but the instructions are not the right ones, because they somehow encourage also this is very simple, just like transfer the original work to the NFT, which is not the case.
Yeah, I think what the blockchain does, that it makes digital artworks, it can make them unique. And I think that's the beauty of it. I mean, there are a lot of issues. It has to do with security. It has to do with a lot of legal issues. So I think this market really has to get mature. When it comes to art fairs and NFTs, actually at Spark last year we had some NFTs at the fair. You've seen in the meantime also other fairs are doing it. So I expect that fairs will also go in that direction with digital artworks. But what in the future will also happen is that NFTs are linked to the physical artworks. And then there are all other opportunities, is that you have like fractionalized ownership. And I mean, this opens a whole, I would say we can talk about this for another 2 hours. But I think that's part of the interesting time that we live in, that I think there are so many things happening right now in the art world, because what NFTs probably also will do is that maybe art becomes more like, I would say almost like a commodity, that a lot more people will have access to it. And because of the digital reproduction can be done much easier, of course. But I don't know, it's another topic, I would say.
Thank you.
But for art fairs, it can also be interesting, because then art fairs can also make money on secondary sales, etc. So there's a lot to explore. Thank you for the invitation, Tevž. I forgot to say that at the beginning.
Yeah. So, any more questions or? Okay. So maybe we wrap it up slowly, and I would have maybe like for goodbye a fun fact. Maybe the people get some ideas for additional questions. So art world is a world where a lot of different, let's say, elements of society mean. So do you have maybe some interesting or funny story from your past activity, from, I don't know, fairs, or, I mean, it can be also bizarre. For instance, I met once a guy. So I will give an example of the story, so then maybe you can react. So I went to Art Basel, and Art Basel is in 2 floors. So the first floor is contemporary art, and then the ground floor is modern art and dealers mainly. So I met this person who just bought a Picasso from a dealer, so it was probably millions. And then I asked him what he liked in the first floor, and he said, "I never go to the first floor." So for me, this was, for instance, it was crazy, because it's 10 steps, and you as a professional, you have interests, but for sure, yeah. Obviously, there are professionals that are very like focused, narrowed interests. So, do you have something that you could share, or like a fun fact or something?
Yes, maybe I did meet in France, not far away from Basel, a collector who amazed this great collection, very private, and never shown the collection and so forth. And he's a vice mayor, so somebody not necessarily earning a lot of money and so forth. The house full of great art, really major names. So, you know, I asked, how did you succeed to put together such a collection? And he said, you know, I have a very simple strategy. Basel is 50 kilometers away, so of course every year I go to Art Basel. You know, okay, that's simple, a lot of people do that, but still they don't create such collections. So what do? Well, between the editions, I sit at home and read the catalog, and I follow which young artist has been 3 times in a row in Art Basel, right? So then I start reading a bit more about those artists. And very often then he bought a piece, and in this rule that he would buy like 1 or 2 pieces, not more than 10,000 euros a piece every year, so quite a limited budget, but he has been doing it for 50 years, right? Even in the time when Art Basel was not so big, and of course Art Basel was showing the really top crop in contemporary art. I think today you see a much broader spectrum of art, both quantity and less quality maybe, but it is of course a much more mixed thing today. So I thought that's a brilliant, simple collecting strategy. Of course, he was extremely knowledgeable on all the artists that he did purchase, so it was not just picking up the name from the catalog, but still he understood the advantage of having this art fair nearby, and he fully used it to put together an amazing collection.
Renger.
Yeah, I have to be very careful. So, you have to wait for the book, I'm afraid. So.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, last chance for a question, and if not, then yeah, I would like to thank.
There is.
Sorry.
Because it's the last question, I want to know what is your definition of ownership? Questions for
all of us.
All of us, all of you.
Should I try first? So I studied law, so I don't know. It's an interesting question. Also, when you talk, for example, about digital art, because what are you buying? Yeah. I think, but this is like the moral right. I think the ownership is, in fact, always with the artist. And if you buy something, basically you buy the right to show it and to keep it. But I don't know. I think it's also a moral question, but there's no definite answer, so to say.
Yeah, Lea. So yeah, I mean, for me, I would quote in this moment actually George Baker, American scholar, that actually we collaborated with a friend Jaka on a project together. I conducted an interview with him, and he said, photography never travels alone. So I would use it in relation to, you know, art never travels alone. So, you know, for me, you know, owning an artwork is not just its physical manifestation, but, you know, it's also, because I cannot call, let's say, things that I have at home a collection, but it's more a reflection of my curatorial activity, you know, that I, sometimes I exchange something with artists, I wrote a text, or, you know, I gave half of the money and for half I wrote a text, or, you know, so it's more that, but still to that, it links me a lot of, you know, stories that I had with these artists, all the moments, all the good things, all the bad things. And of course also, I mean, I think that if it's at my apartment, I think I also have a responsibility that, you know, if there is an interest from the artist or interest from the public, I'm of course willing to, you know, to give works to public to see. So yeah, I think that this exclusivity in owning, yeah, it's something that I think, yeah, this public responsibility can, yeah, definitely breach. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, so I won't try that sort of reply, and trying some sort of philosophical answer, I would be out on very thin ice, so I won't do that either. I'm sure that there are quite a number of people writing PhD theses about this question, and I hardly would try to compete with them. But of course, what I would point out, maybe a bit building on your answer here, is that of course I think in terms of art, we can talk about three types of ownership, or three types of stake related to art. One was, or two were already named here, which is on one side the artist, on the other hand the legal owner, if we want to define a collector or somebody legally owning a piece of art somehow. And then the third is the public. And I think the ownership is somewhere in between these three. As I define contemporary art as that thing that is happening between a viewer and what we define as a work of art, that means that even if somebody physically owns a painting, he doesn't own what happens between that painting and the public. So I do think that if we would draw a triangle, the ownership would be somewhere inside that triangle, and based on legal system, philosophy, society, and corner from which you look at that triangle, that ownership point would be drawn in different directions, and probably it's very hard to pinpoint a single location, but I would definitely see it in this sort of triangle where also the public has a right to see, to experiment the piece of art and so forth. But it clearly is a very complicated question so late in the night.
Very common, but I think even crucial question is,
Alexander,
okay? Art market. Whose influence is much greater on the art market? The influence of art fairs, collecting a lot of galleries, or auction houses?
Well,
your meaning?
I think any or the art world is a very complicated system where it's very hard to say who has more influence. I always like to imagine the art system as a set of pyramids. You have galleries, which are a pyramid. You have auction houses, which again are a pyramid of various levels. You have artists. Separate pyramids, obviously, or very little superimposed. You have artists that are again a type of pyramid. You have collectors, which again, I'm sure you will agree with me, there's a perception of a pyramid of collectors, and each one will influence each other in different ways. So if you ask me, it's the top level of the galleries and art fairs and the top level of the auction houses and the top level of the artists and the top level of the collectors that have the biggest influence. So it's always this top layer that has the influence. I can't really define which of them has the bigger, and it probably depends on context and issue and artist and artwork, right? But obviously what we see today, and again, you have the pyramid, very important, the pyramid of institutions, of museums and foundations and all that. And again, the top layer of museums obviously influence, because depending on what exhibitions what artists they show in the major museums or major institutions, that will have an influence even in the market, right? So I think what is happening today is that importance is growing, and I think, but probably you feel that much better, I think the middle layer is losing the sort of part of that influence that maybe historically it used to have. But I do feel that you clearly have small sets of entities and people that have more and more relevant influence in various ways in the art world.
Yeah, maybe one addition. I think there has been a period that these global brands, you saw them coming up in the art world. What I do see at the same time now, after the pandemic, that what they sell, regional markets, that there's now another momentum. So I feel there will be also stronger regional markets, because I don't think it's coming back that we all fly everywhere. So there is something happening, but yes, I think the middle layer has it quite difficult also from a business perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just, thanks for your excellent question. Also, maybe I would have a small addition for you, Ovidiu. I think that, I mean, these are like separate trains that are going. There is a primary market, there's a secondary market, there are institutions, there are media, there is production, but they often meet. So I think that this influence is actually a very complex strategy that's inherent in the system of art. Yeah, of course. But what I actually wanted to touch upon with you, Ovidiu, is because, okay, you have collection, there is art encounters, and there are collaborations with institutions that you have. But you are also, for instance, member of acquisition committee in Tate Modern. So it's interesting. I mean, I think this also kind of illustrates your question, where you are basically a private entity who is doing a public program, who's sitting in the committee of the public institution. This is so maybe just a few words about your experience.
Right. Yes, a fair question. First of all, a clarification. My collection is my private collection, and the foundation is not linked to my collection. So it's not the foundation of my collection. There's a lot of foundations of collections in the world, but it's not my case. The foundation is doing just a biennial and a permanent program. And there we try to have certain rules in relation to my collection, in the sense that, for example, in the biennial, we strongly encourage curators not to select pieces from my collection. So if they want a certain artist, they need to try first to get the works from the artist or from the gallery. And if they can't get it in that way, they might resort to my collection, but that always happens in a very limited way. On the other hand, of course, the collection is a kind of resource for the foundation if we want to put together certain exhibitions that touch areas that my collection also covers. It is a very easy to use resource. It's not expensive to ship, it's already insured and all that. Regarding my presence in museums, of course, that's a system that museums in the Western world especially have developed in the last maybe, 20 years. I think at least Tate does it very smartly. To what respect? Yes, we are this committee of acquisition for Eastern Europe and Russia, and we're a number of collectors in this committee where we support financially the acquisitions. There is the impression that we have, formally we are presented with a list of works to be acquired, and we vote which works are being acquired every year. On the other hand, that list is put together by the curators of the museum. Any work we would choose from that list is a very valid piece of work, and it very nicely complements what's already in the collection. So it is the appearance that we have an influence, but in reality, the major decisions are taken way before we get to select. And even the works that we don't select from the list, normally the museum will go to other sources of finances and will acquire them anyway, right? The really important role that we have is a different one, and that is that we point out to curators in the museum what artists they should be looking at, right? And then they do their work of curators. They go and meet the artist and see the works, and they can decide, totally uninteresting for us, or maybe, wow, we didn't know about this artist. And here what they try to do is to use our experience of collectors of a given area. Of course, besides the works, we also normally have a lot of knowledge about the area. And of course, a curator sitting in London and responsible for big geographical areas, it's very hard to know exactly what's new, or what, I don't know, a state of an artist of the 60s suddenly has appeared somewhere at a widow or whatever, right? So we do have this role of being a kind of scouts, like, going out and identifying potential interesting artists or potential interesting artworks. But at the end of the day, honestly, the decision is with the curatorial team of the museum, and only formally with us. But so I think Tate does have a very smart approach to this process. I'm not convinced that other museums that maybe have copied this model are as rigorous to separate this influence from the financial support. But at least with Tate, I strongly see that they consciously see to it that actually the decision is with them and not really with us, right? So I think it's also important in the art world, very, 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 very often, and all over the world, people involved in the art world will have more than one hat, right? An artist will have the hat of an artist, but he might also be helping running an artist-run space. That's a small gallery, even if we call it artist-run space, right? A curator might also be a consultant to a collector. So a lot of people in the art world, a collector will maybe have a foundation or some sort of institution, or open a museum. So people do have various hats. What's important is that, first of all, that people understand that that's okay, and that we have the mechanisms to keep those hats on in the right moment. Or, when I have the hat of the collector, I act in a certain way. When I have the hat of the president of the foundation, I need to think and to act differently. When I'm involved with Tate, again, I should not recommend them to look at the artist that I recently bought, right? But the artist that had a very interesting show in a gallery or in a museum, right? So I think it's part of the system, right? And you have people and institutions that better handle these potential conflicts, and then you have people and institutions that are less good at doing that. Or?
I have also two hats.
Okay, thank you. Once again, thank you, Renger, thank you, Ovidiu, and thank you for coming. So have a nice evening.